Hi, lovelies. Just wanted to take some time to share with you my thoughts um, regarding barriers to intimacy. I have an anniversary coming up in about a week, and this will be year 9 in this marriage. And as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I was just looking back on all the previous years of my marriage. And where I stand today is certainly not where I was on that first day of marriage. And just to give you a little insight is when I got married, I brought over some baggage that I had accumulated in all the relationships prior to my meeting my husband. From the ages of 17 to 30, I was a serial dater. I was in relationships on and off, in and out, one after the other. And each relationship that I was in, it was just, there were various times. It could have been a year, it could have been 8 months, it could have been 2 months, it could have been 2 years, could have been 4 years, and then back to 8 months. And these were all different individuals. And in those relationships, there were violations. There were violations of abuse and just hurts that took place. Not being heard, not being known, being belittled, being controlling, using hurts and pains and lording it over for the purposes of diminishing the person or making them small. And I wasn't innocent either, because every time there was a fracture, I would harbor anger. Every time there was a wound, I would harbor resentment and bitterness, and it took root. And it stayed there because I never dealt with it. But what I thought to do was just to bury it, and thinking if I just bury it, it'll go away with time, because time heals all wounds. That's what the world says. But in reality, what it was doing was it was just creating a veneer. It was creating a mask, many masks. And I was inventing many different personas because I didn't really know who I was underneath all of that compounding of these fractures after fracture after fracture, one after the next, be it being done to me or me doing it to somebody else in retaliation, as a protector, as a way to self-protect. And anger was the biggest tool that I would use to keep people far, far away. So what had happened is, over the course of all those years from 17 to 30, I managed to keep myself very, very hidden from many people. And by the time I met my husband, what he got was a very fearful, ashamed, and guilt-ridden wife who didn't know how to speak about the hard things, who didn't know how to communicate. It was like my voice was suppressed. I only know how to do defense, and the way I do defense was to allow pride and anger to do what it does best, which is pushes people away. And so as I was thinking about that, all those years growing and learning who I am at the core in Christ, and Him stripping away all these masks and these personas that I had used for so long to stand my ground and to feel safe, what I learned is that as He continued to bombard my mind and dominate my thinking according to His truth, it became a salve to every wound that took place in those relationships, and he would heal that wound, and then he would replace it with the truth, and then he'd move on to the next wound, and then the next wound, and the scar, he'd salve that up with his word. And so I sit here and I think it's incredible what God has brought me through in the last 9 years with my husband. I know that God has designed a marriage to be a place where we can be unashamed, where we can be bare and wide open and exposed in all the things, be it the fears, the sorrows, the anguishes, the joys, all the good, all the bad, all the ugly, and we can just lay it bare before our husbands, and our husbands can lay it bare before us, and it would be a safe place to be known, to be exposed, to get away from the hiding. And it's taken me all of 9 years to finally get to a place where I don't have to be afraid anymore. I don't have to be ashamed of what was before, because now what I get to do is I get to share that with my husband, who God has given me to know me the most in this whole world, and for me to know him. And while it's been very challenging, letting go of all these masks and being known at the root, the good, the bad, the ugly, because really the only good in me is what Christ has done in me. Anything that he has changed from this to this, from ugly to beautiful, from heinous to miraculous, is only because of his goodness and his grace. And it was very scary. So I now entered this next year, this year 9, in a place where I feel completely free from wanting to hide away in shame and guilt before my husband, before the one that God gave me in this covenant marriage. And guess what? Even though he's seen all those things, all those colors that flew out, and all the things that I tried to hide in anger and resentment and bitterness, trying to push it down, the Lord didn't let it stay down, because by bringing it up to the surface and bringing it out allowed me to see what was actually in there that needed mending, that needed restoration, that needed the truth, so that I wouldn't be afraid anymore. And my husband's still here. He hasn't discarded me. And it's because I know that he's committed to the Lord, that he's committed to me, that he's committed to this marriage. And so my worst fear was that if he knew these things about me, that he would throw me away. But he hasn't. And for that I'm thankful, because God knows what he was doing all along, and he's not going to let us stay where we once were. He's going to grow us. And it reminded me in Genesis, in the very last verse in Genesis 2, it says, I love this. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. And that was before the fall. They were naked and they were not ashamed. And not just physically. I'm just thinking of the whole picture, vulnerable in all the areas. And it wasn't until the fall that Adam and Eve experienced the immediate consequences of sin, when their eyes were both opened and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. So trying to hide and be hidden and not be known and to be shameful is something that took place in the garden. And it still happens today. But as a believer, I don't want to be hidden from my husband. He's given me my husband to know me, to be known by him, and vice versa. And all it takes is the Lord and his word to dispel those lies, to heal those wounds with his salve of his truth. and he can do it for anyone.